Gripes. Leadership. For some reason, the current emphasis on leaders and leadership principles bugs me. I envision people in a sterile room discussing the virtues of leadership. Every attendee has a bottle of aqua puritas and a notepad. They listen to a leader with an MBA expound about how a successful business should be operated. The church, according to some, is a business. Therefore, the virtues of its pastor should be the same as those of a successful business leader. I picture a couple of cows standing by the roadside viewing a colorful advertisement on the side of a milk truck as it passes by. The display pictures two ideal cows with a description of their milk written above them: homogenized, pasteurized, vitamins A, B, C, D added. After the truck passes, one cow turns to the other cow and ruefully remarks, "Don't you feel terribly inadequate?" Some church-related leadership hype is grass that has successfully transited the digestive system of a bull. They take a bit from Abraham's life, a bit from Moses' life, a bit from David's life, and try to derive the leadership principles that made them successful. Then they create a hybrid leader, one who possesses in his person all these principles. Their creation makes Superman pale in significance. So, rather than living the life of Abraham, Moses, or David, or sadly enough, their own, they try to cull leadership principles out of them and construe a life from that. Somebody even tried to cull leadership principles from my life. They finally gave up when they realized that these principles contradicted each other. Of course, they did not add my anxiety attacks or my calling my kids by names their parents never gave them to the principle mix. I see leaders being lifted up as examples of success and paraded before our eyes as pasteurized, homogenized, with a lot of vitamins added, the epitome of success. Yet I have the sneaking suspicion that the glorification of leaders and leadership qualities is just another subtle form of humanism, the glorification of man. The next vision that invariably follows is Martin Luther and his fellow reformer sitting in a smoke-filled pub with a stein of beer in their hand, discussing theology and the deep things of God. Give me the pub and the theology any time. I will manage. Some pastors could benefit from burning their leadership stuff and getting their noses back into theology books like Strong, Hodge, Bishop John Charles Ryle, and a host of others. It is as the good book says, "The word of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, then shalt thou have success." For me, the antidote to this leadership hype is to bury my nose in the Bible or a theology book, a book that extols God and His work of love for me. It is the place where I can unashamedly be but a simple child, a worm, a blade of grass that flourishes in the morning and withers by nightfall, the place where I behold the glory of God, in the light of which my own assumed importance fades, like the light of stars in the blazing noontime sun. I can faithfully labor in His presence. This is success in God's eyes. Carpentry training. I began working for 3 years as a carpenter's apprentice in a factory that made railway wagons in June 1951. I discovered that loving books and studying them were two different things. To my parents' great disappointment, I opted for a trade rather than continuing school after grade 8. My godfather offered to pay for my college fees, but I had no interest in further studies. Carpentry and working with wood appealed to me and somehow suited my personality. It also proved very useful when we started to work on the hostel here at Nagpur. Not that I did much carpentry, but the training helped me to develop a practical turn of mind, a gift from my father's side of the family. At the end of 3 years, I received the coveted journeyman certificate. This stated, or rather implied, that I was cleverer with my hands than I was with my mind. I passed as 3rd out of 10 apprentices. The reason I did not apply my mind was because it was always somewhere else. My first bicycle. I'm an adventurer at heart. My voracious reading filled my mind with longings for those places the writer so aptly and temptingly described. I wanted to see the world, and relive the adventures of the characters in those narratives. It was during my time as an apprentice that I received my first bicycle. It was second-hand and 25 years old, but it was my gate to the world, my escape to freedom. While other boys my age took pictures of their girlfriends, I chose maps of the world, places I wanted to visit, to cover my bed. I traveled extensively on my bicycle. One of my first trips was to the Bodensee in southern Germany, a 600-kilometer journey one way. I hardly knew how to handle the bike and had to walk it across an intersection, but that did not deter me. I traveled to places like Paris, Amsterdam, Brussels, Luxembourg, London, and even Cardiff on the weekends and holidays. I had a ferocious appetite for new places, new sights, and new experiences. Once, while staying overnight in London at a youth hostel, somebody stole my sweater from my bicycle. The next day, as sort of compensation, a bobby spent the whole day with me showing me London, at his expense. I was away from home every holiday except Christmas. I sometimes traveled alone, and sometimes with friends, whom I persuaded to join me in experiencing the glories of the world. Some of those trips earned me curses, for it was not what they had expected. I slept under the stars or in makeshift shelters made from branches, leaves, and grass. Rain or snow made no difference to me. I was often hungry because I simply had no money. Yet my heart continually ached for more places to see and to explore. Chapter 2. To India and Back. By bicycle to India. The world is a book, and those who do not travel read only a page. St. Augustine. I received my carpenter's diploma in June 1954. Exactly 1 year later, inspired by the story of a man who had cycled around the world, I set out for India, and hopefully beyond, on my own bicycle. My parents could not dissuade me from going. As a concession to them, I invited one of my older brothers to accompany me. Now, it always puzzles me why I spent so much time away from my parents' loving care. We left Aachen, Germany on June 5, 1955, with a new cycle, a tent, pots, pans, and some clothes and oodles of maps. Of course, we had very little money, but such a minor detail never bothered us, an attitude which certainly has been handy since I became a missionary. We were indestructible, the vanity of youth. For the next 6 months, we traveled through places which had inflamed my boyhood imagination. I knew some English. I had volunteered for English classes in grade 4, even though the chance of ever stepping outside of Germany during the war years was non-existent. We made our way through Germany, Austria, and Yugoslavia, which was still communist and scary. Next, we came to Greece and Turkey, where I left my brother sick in a hospital. He returned to Germany, but made his own journey by bicycle with a friend as far as Sri Lanka a year later. I continued on alone for a short time. Then I met another German boy my age, Peter Sorrell, and we continued on our journey together through Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, and Pakistan. Almost 7 months after I left Germany, we reached Karachi, Pakistan on December 31, 1955. By this time, our cycles had deteriorated into scrap. Through my friend, who is a qualified chef, I was able to get a job as a carpenter at the Palace Hotel in Karachi for 6 months. There, I hoped to make enough money to get back to Germany. I left Pakistan in June 1956. Peter had offered to pay for my fare back to Germany by ship, together with him. But I felt it would be very unfair for him to spend his hard-earned money that way. Also, I wanted to see something of India, so I took a boat to Mumbai and from there hitchhiked back to Germany via Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, Yugoslavia, and Austria. My hitchhiking included everything from train to bus and bullock cart, plus a fair deal of walking. I often felt frightened as I slept alone in distant places, far from any help, far from people who spoke my language, or from anybody else for that matter. Yet, I met many beautiful and kind-hearted people on my journeys who were ever ready to help. I sprained my ankle in Quetta, Baluchistan, in Pakistan, and a kind family looked after me for 2 weeks until I could walk again. They then paid for my train to Zahedan, an Iranian border town. In Tehran, the head of the Red Crescent and her team sewed a pocket in my sweater and filled it up with enough money to get me back to Germany. Because of this, the world seemed to be kinder and more gracious. Finally, I arrived back in Germany in rags and penniless late in October 1956. As an aside, I had lost touch with Peter Sorrell for 50 years, but we recently met together in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. My appearance on the Christian television show 100 Huntley Street helped bring about our reunion. The interviewer showed great interest in my bicycle trip to India, which I considered but a trivial part of my life compared to my fascinating adventure in the quest for the God of Elijah. A friend of Peter's saw the show, and he phoned Peter to tell him about this German who had also taken a cycling trip to India. Peter switched on the television, realized it was me, and then phoned India to find out where I was. At that time, Bapu and I were in Prince George, in northern British Columbia, Canada. We took the long drive to Edmonton. It was a great, even though brief, reunion after 50 years. Bapu and I spent one afternoon and night with Peter, and as you can well imagine, we didn't waste our time talking about the events in the world. We just reminisced about our adventure so long ago. I was glad that Bapu was with me and could listen as Peter, who remembered much more than I, recounted events from that crazy journey. It was a beautiful ending to a strenuous 6½ months of furlough. It is often not the event, but the memory of an event that makes it so enjoyable. This surely applies to my ventures. My heart often thrills as I think of the sights I have seen, the cities I have, quote, conquered, unquote, the places where I have placed my feet, and the people and cultures that have touched me. These experiences shaped my life. No doubt it was that visit to India that ultimately brought me back to India in 1972. India became a magnet, my lodestar, to which I was drawn and to which, against all hope, I later returned. Maybe it was the deprivation of my early years in Germany as a child that led me to do what I am doing now, looking after poor kids. But I prefer to take God's word to Jeremiah the prophet as my own. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. There are many details I have forgotten about this adventure. Yet it is not the meals we remember, but the meals we take in that shape our bodies. This holds true of our experiences. They shape and mold our mind, even though we have long forgotten many of them. This also holds true of God's Word, as we absorb it Sunday after Sunday. But first, to Canada. The restlessness which marked my life as a boy continued to haunt me after my return to Germany from India. I had previously applied for emigration to Canada, and my application had been granted on the basis of my journeyman's diploma. But it was a motorcycle accident in August 1957, from which I still bear the scars, that made me finally decide to avail myself of the Canadian visa. The money from the insurance covered the plane fare. I arrived in Montreal on May 4, 1958, one day earlier than the expiration date of the visa. Abraham Lincoln was once accused of being two-faced. He replied, "If I were two-faced, would I be using this one?" A pastor once looked at my face and asked, "Were you in a plane accident?" I pointed to the scar below my left eye and I told him, "This is from a motorcycle accident, but the rest is my parents' fault." Even though the motorcycle accident was caused by my reckless driving, God used the opportunity to nudge me in the direction of His plans for my future. I sometimes wonder if God nudged Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees and finally to Haran with a motorcycle accident. Unlike that venerated saint, I was but 22 when I left Germany again, some 20 months after my return from India. My promise to return to Germany soon lengthened into a 14-year absence, and even then I returned for only a couple of weeks. I regret that I spent my first few years in Montreal living mainly among German-speaking people. Because of this, I never learned proper English, at least the written and spoken English. I had enjoyed the relative safety of the boarding house, until a bitter disagreement arose with one of the boarders, and I left the house. I found myself alone again. The first few days were difficult, and I found myself feeling terribly lonely. Yet, one can get used to almost anything. It was then, far away from peer pressure, that I decided to stop smoking. At that time, I smoked 40 cigarettes a day. This, so it seems, was in preparation for me embracing the Protestants, who frowned upon smoking, whereas Catholics did not. Usually, my eyes lit up with my first smoke. But on this particular morning, I suggested to myself that I defer smoking the first cigarette until the coffee break at work. It was difficult, but not impossible. When that time arrived, I told myself that waiting until the lunch break would not kill me either. I kept pushing back my time limit until 9 p.m. Then I broke down and had a smoke. I could not convince myself that it was possible for me to go more than 12 hours without a cigarette. Yet that day in March 1964 marked the last day I ever smoked a cigarette. I carried a pack of cigarettes and matches with me for a week, lest I come out of my self-imposed abstinence and find myself screaming for a cigarette. I never considered smoking to be a sin or particularly evil. Few people did in 1964. I only hated to be a slave to this thing, and of course it was expensive. Later, after I had become a Christian, one boy asked me, "Do I go to heaven if I smoke?" I replied, "Sure, only sooner." Canadian citizenship. I had been living in Canada for 5.5 years, and felt this would be the place I wanted to settle down, so I became a Canadian citizen on December 11, 1963. By that act, I had also forfeited any right to marry, as I had to swear on the Bible to be faithful to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. I trust the Queen feels honored that I have remained faithful. I didn't realize that Canada would simply be a stepping stone in my roundabout pilgrimage to India. It was an invaluable stepping stone because, as a citizen of a Commonwealth country, I could live and work in India when others were denied that privilege. I also learned English, sort of. However, since early 1972, I have spent only short periods of time in Canada, mainly on furloughs, trying to raise money for my kids in India. My spiritual journey. Our hearts are restless till they rest in Thee. St. Augustine. Of course, St. Augustine was right, and my going to Canada alone did not help to calm my restlessness. I went from job to job, and in June 1960, with another young German, hitchhiked down to Texas, across to California, and then up the coast to Vancouver. My partner found himself a girlfriend, and so in mid-November, I decided to leave Vancouver and hitchhike back to Montreal alone. When I eventually stopped over at Kapuskasing, a small town in northern Ontario, I asked the police to let me sleep in the jail, as I had no money for a hotel and would certainly have frozen to death on the streets. Another young vagrant was locked up with me for the same reason. Upon leaving in the morning, I shared with him what little tobacco and cigarette paper I had. A short time later, on the road again, having a coffee and a piece of toast at a small cafe, a man started to talk to me and shared his experiences as a vagabond in his youth. Seeing my sadly depleted tobacco pouch, he bought me a full packet of tobacco, plus paper, and also paid for my breakfast. Was God repaying my kindness? Yes, I believe so. After relating the story to a group of Christian men, one declared, "God does not give people tobacco." I wish I could be so authoritative about what God does and what He doesn't do, what He gives and what He doesn't give. Turning from God, the last straw. While attending a Catholic church service in Montreal, I told God, Let me have my freedom. Leave me alone. Stop looking over my shoulder all the time. I poorly understood the idea of God looking over our shoulder. To me, it was as if God was waiting for me to do something wrong so that He could punish me. But in truth, it was the watching of a mother over her baby to prevent harm from coming to it. Randy K. Milholland wisely states, "It's not a matter of whether or not someone's watching over you. It's just a question of their intentions." My desire for freedom from God led me down a rocky path. I was first introduced to the writing of Ayn Rand through a colleague while I was working in Montreal. Ayn Rand was a U.S. novelist and essayist who was born in Russia in 1905 and died in 1982. The Fountainhead, The Atlas Shrugged, and not the least, The Anthem, fired my imagination. The concept of the I elevated above the we made me her instant disciple. Though I did not really understand it, individualism was the core philosophy of my life. I remember praying when I was but a boy, "Oh God, I know we are all sheep, but please make me a little bit different. Give me a black tail or something, but make me different." It seems God answered my prayer and succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. At age 25, I was fascinated to discover that books actually could carry a message, life-shaping messages. Until then, my literary fare consisted of science fiction, adventure stories, El Zorro, etc. Suddenly, I discovered that books were powerful. This must be what Martin Luther meant when he wrote, "We must throw the inkpot at the devil." Whether he threw an actual inkpot at the devil, as the anecdote reports, I do not know, but I have discovered the power of the written word. I am not sure in which one of her books I read this, but Ayn Rand compared the government with Attila the Hun and the church with the witch doctor. Where Attila could not control the masses by the fear of the sword, the witch doctor would control them by the fear of hell or whatever. Between the two, they controlled the masses. I not only fell for this idea, but I swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. I turned against the church and by association against God. True understanding came much later, but now my mind was set against the church and all that it stood for, and, foolishly, I included God in my declaration of freedom. But secretly, I was relieved to not be answerable to anybody for my conduct, the undeclared but real reason for turning against God and His church. The Kite. The following is part of a letter which later I transformed into a story, a poem for the prodigals of this world, of which I was one. They on the heights are not the souls who never erred or went astray, who ever lingered harbor-bound and walked rose-bordered ways. But those who stand when first comes dawn are those who stumbled but went on. Author unknown. One evening in Nagpur, I stood alone in the dusk, tired and weary. I leaned against the half-constructed new bathrooms that bordered the northeastern end of our playground next to the water tower. "Why do you push yourself so hard?" I mused. "Why not take it a bit easy, as everybody is telling you?" I looked across the playground to the big dorm, all lit up, for an answer. Sounds of subdued but joyful laughter of some happy little kids came floating towards me. I listened for a while, and then smiled. Some of the weariness left me. I got my answer. I turned to walk to my bungalow and noticed a ghost-like white apparition floating gently over the southern part of the playground. A kite! I neither saw the boy hidden by the darkness nor the string, but both were there. The kite could not float without either. The string, I mused, is the most important thing. The string must be strong enough to hold the kite securely, but light enough to not drag it down by its weight. The string that restrains it also lets it fly. I silently watched as the kite effortlessly climbed higher and higher until it was barely visible. Somehow, I sense its desire to break free of the restraint. Yet, ironically, that very freedom would destroy it. I imagined a dialogue between the kite and the string. The kite wistfully tells the string, "Let me go. Release me. You are holding me back. You are limiting my freedom to rise. I want to reach the stars." "No, no," the string remonstrates with the kite. "This freedom would destroy you. The wind pushes you higher. I am protecting you with this restraint. I keep you safe and successful." But the kite persists. Finally, with great sadness, the string lets go of the kite. Released from its restraint, the kite exults and shouts to the wind, "I am free! I am free! Take me higher, my brother!" But the wind just laughs as it tosses the now free kite hither and yon, and finally, tiring of it, the wind loosens its hold, and the hapless kite slowly floats down to earth. As it nears the ground, greedy little hands grab for it, and in their eagerness to possess it, they tear it and destroy it. As the kite lies neglected on the ground, a puff of wind picks it up and contemptuously blows it into a corner. Just another discarded piece of trash. The kite whispers, "Is this what freedom is all about? Is this the freedom I craved?" A few days later, a boy finds the broken kite and gently patches it up. He adds some string and tosses the kite into the air. Slowly, at first tentatively, the kite rises. It hesitates, and then commits itself to the same wind which had contemptuously tossed it about and discarded it. The wind had been its master, but now, due to the restraining power of the string, it was his servant. The parable of the prodigal son tells of repentance, confession, and restoration. The story ends with the prodigal returning home restored. But how many prodigals do? If there is a lesson in the kite, it is that we need the restraint of laws, customs, and family ties to succeed. God's formula for success is summed up in Joshua 1:8. "This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success." A good kite string is light and strong, light enough to allow the kite to rise, and strong enough to hold it without breaking. God's laws are the same. They are not meant to encumber us or to hold us back, but their restraint enables us to fly spiritually. Those of us who have thrown off the restraints of God's law and have found ourselves in the position of the kite, like the prodigal son, and have discovered that our freedom worked to our destruction, should consider returning to the restraining love of our Father and plead like the hymn writer of old. "Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Let thy goodness, like a fetter, bind my wandering heart to thee." Back to the West. My previous experience in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, had not been good. Yet, when I found myself without a job in Montreal in the early fall of 1964, I decided to drive my Volkswagen across Canada to Vancouver in the hope of finding work. Again, God used my wanderlust to nudge me closer to where He wanted me. I always followed the leading of my heart and what I did, but frequently I wonder if I was not following the promptings of a dysfunctional GPS. I wandered all over the place, searching for something to exceed the thrill of the last place, a satisfaction the last adventure failed to produce. I did not know what I was looking for. Some might have justifiably accused me of chasing after the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It was not the gold that fascinated me, but the quest. Others who knew me often wondered, "Quo vadis, Frank? Where are you going?" Time would tell, where indeed. Finally, through a tortuous and circuitous path, I reached my destination. I did not find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but the pearl of great price, namely, the Lord Jesus Christ. As I traveled to Vancouver, my car broke down in Kelowna, British Columbia. I could not afford to repair it, nor did I have the money to pay the monthly installments, so the bank repossessed it. Without a car and no money, I found myself picking apples for a living. At the end of the apple-picking season in Kelowna, I briefly went to Penticton, a town nearby, and finally to Kamloops. My intention was to sit out the winter in a rented room and live off unemployment enjoyment, unemployment money. But God, who obviously had me on a long leash, decided it was time to pull me in. It was His plan to take me to Kamloops, but it was not His plan for me to spend the winter watching television. The Employment Bureau placed me with a Christian carpenter who needed a worker. They gave me very little choice.